Well, hi there. I am here today with an Abronia. That is the genus for the Mexican Arboreal Alligator Lizards. These lizards are out of this world. I think these are probably on the short list of the most beautiful lizards I've ever seen in my entire life. Let's just start with the body shape. It's incredible. Possibly the most dragon-like of all of the lizards we've reviewed, maybe of all lizards in the world. There are a few, like the armadillo lizards and maybe the crocodile skinks, that come close for dragon-like appearance, but these guys are right up there. And we'll make sure to include links to those videos because we have covered both of those lizards down in the description in case you want to check them out later. But these guys are just amazing. This particular alligator lizard is Abronia graminea, which, I mean, they're all beautiful, but in my opinion, this is the most beautiful of the alligator lizards, period. Possibly of lizards, full stop. The color, they are this vibrant green. They range all the way to blues to a very dark green like this one. Then they've got these bright yellow eyes, and the bottoms of their jaws are bright yellow. The body shape in general, they're long, so long, but just, it's like perfection. They've got this long prehensile tail. Prehensile tails are probably my favorite tails in the world, and theirs is prehensile. They've got relatively small legs with long toes, but I don't know, there's just something about the proportion. They're beautiful. And then the scalation. The scales look a lot like an alligator, which is why they're called alligator lizards. But then if you look at the patterns on the individual scales, oh my goodness, it's hard to say that I've seen something more beautiful in my entire life. These guys are out of this world. I've actually got pretty good eyesight, and I can tell that this is a beautiful lizard, but there are things that you guys are seeing right now when we looked at that footage through the macro lens that I just hadn't ever noticed before, and that is especially the patterning on each scale. I mean, it just seems like the closer you get to these guys, the more amazing they become. There are some things that look beautiful from a distance, like my car, but the closer you get, the worse it looks. This lizard is not that. This lizard is a brand new Ferrari, which looks glorious from a distance, and the closer you get, the more you can see the absolute attention to detail that nature put into making this possibly the most beautiful lizard in the world. They're also interesting, very interesting captives. They climb a lot. They move around like monkeys in the trees a little bit. They've got that prehensile tail that they use to hold on, and then they will explore quite a lot. And they're very inquisitive lizards, which makes that a lot of fun. They're also a very reasonable size. Almost too small to be the perfect size lizard in my opinion, but I don't know. They're a really wonderful size, very manageable for handling, but big enough so that you're not going to lose track of them or crush them on accident. Maybe just a little bit too small for a child, but we'll discuss that in a minute. And that size also makes them very reasonable to house and reasonable to feed, take care of. They're just really amazing, amazing lizards, and of course, beautiful beyond all description. Is the Abronia Arboreal Alligator Lizard the right pet reptile for you? Overall, we give the Abronia Arboreal Alligator Lizard a score of 2.8 out of 5, which is kind of a low score given how just absolutely incredible and amazing, and the fact that this is a dream lizard to a lot of people, perhaps myself included. But hopefully that score will make sense very shortly. To help us sort this out, we've broken it down into our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. So let's begin with handleability. When it comes to handleability, we give, oh, look at your little mouth. Hi. This is maybe a good time to reference this now. He wasn't doing anything aggressive, but these guys, some of them can be bitey. And for such a little lizard, they have ferociously powerful jaws. And I've seen situations where they will bite little chunks of skin off. So if you get one that's bitey, handleability is not so great. And that might explain a little bit why we give the Arboreal Alligator Lizard a score of 3 out of 5 for handleability. This one, and a lot of them, are really, really good for handling. If they're not bitey, they're really good for handling. For starters, they tend to move slowly and deliberately wherever they go, which is great. I mean, they can scurry off fairly quickly, but they tend not to do this very often. And so as long as you're handling them calmly and for periods of time that are not excessive, they're probably going to hang out with you pretty nicely. And that's amazing for a lizard this small. As I mentioned before, they might bite a chunk out of your hand. I have seen this happen. I've seen people who handle them regularly and the lizard just consistently bites big chunks out of their hand. So that is something to be aware of, maybe something to consider before purchasing one or when you're picking out an individual, because a lot may vary based on personality. As I said before, they're maybe a little bit too small, and my only reason for saying that is just because a lizard this small could be easily injured while handling it, especially if you hand it off to a child or something. It's not going to handle being squeezed or dropped very well. Some bigger snakes and lizards would handle just the errors that children tend to make a lot better. And so I wouldn't recommend having most children handle an alligator lizard. This is more of an adult handling lizard only. Something really wonderful is that their nails, because they are such a small lizard, are, even though they're sharp and for climbing, they're not going to injure you at all. And that is something you definitely run into when you get into bigger lizards. And they're also very good at holding on. As an arboreal lizard, they need to be good at holding on. They live up in the trees, and sometimes it gets windy up there, and they can't just fall to their deaths every day. That's a bad strategy. And so they're very good at holding on. Like I said, they've got those little nails, which are good, and also that prehensile tail, and I love me a prehensile tail. That's just the greatest thing an animal could have. Love that. Generally speaking, I would probably give Arboreal Alligator Lizards a score of 4 out of 5 if it weren't for the bitey individuals, which are not wholly uncommon. And for that reason, they get that score of 3 out of 5. When it comes to care, we give the Arboreal Alligator Lizard a score of 3 out of 5. There are some really great ways to kill your alligator lizard. This is probably not something you intend to do, but it's still something that people do. The fastest ways to do this, other than crushing them to death, which would be easy to do because they're a small lizard, would be excessive heat or dehydration. These lizards come from areas that are not excessively hot, and they are not adapted to handle excessive heat, the kind of heat that you would give to, say, a bearded dragon. That would kill them very quickly. Probably a bigger place to worry about this, unless you have an excessively hot light on your enclosure, would be if you're transporting them in a car. Make sure it doesn't get too hot even for a short period of time. Dehydration is also an issue. These guys come from a humid area, and they're going to be drinking droplets of water regularly, and they can easily die from dehydration fairly quickly. Not as quickly as heat, but fairly quickly. There are slower ways, though, to kill your Arboreal Alligator Lizard. You don't want to do this, but people do. One of them would be a lack of air movement. These guys actually need fairly good ventilation in their enclosure. Stagnant air can be a real problem for them. Also a lack of UVB, ultraviolet light. That's something that can kill them more slowly. To avoid these things, you should keep your temperatures cooler, make sure that you've got good air movement in the enclosure, and that you have a good temperature gradient so they can select the temperature at which they want to be at any given time. UVB, so ultraviolet basking lights, those are an absolute must. You're going to need those. Those are going to be like a fluorescent tube or a coil light. You're going to need that. You might not need basking lights, though, for heat, except maybe in the winter, depending on how cold you let your house become. Screen enclosures are probably the best enclosures for these guys, and that's going to allow them to have the air movement that they need. Though they will use floor space, height is actually something they're going to appreciate even more. So provide a screen enclosure that is tall over long. They're also going to need, because humidity is so important and they live in a screen enclosure, which means it dries out quickly, they're going to need frequent misting. I would definitely recommend a misting system or a fogger for these guys. And then provide a deep, thick layer of sphagnum moss so that they can burrow into it and get that humidity that they need. Make sure that there are regions of the sphagnum moss that are more humid than others so they can select the microhabitat that will be most appropriate for their humidity needs at any given time. I would also recommend using bromeliads as well as other live plants in the enclosure. These are going to help with humidity and provide a beautiful and naturalistic space for these guys. They're going to provide a lot of the natural microhabitats that these guys use in the wild. They're going to be eating primarily insects misted with calcium and vitamins. Make sure that calcium has D3 in it. This is a diurnal lizard, and like we mentioned, that UVB is essential for them to have 4D3, and so adding D3 in there will help as well. And just make sure you provide a lot of places for them to climb and hide. These are going to be important so they don't become stressed and just so that they can behave normally. When it comes to hardiness, we give the Arboreal Alligator Lizard, the Abronia, a score of 3 out of 5. As we mentioned before, there are many ways to kill them, and generally speaking, this is not a lizard you want to kill on accident. In addition to this, the majority of them that you will find, at least the adults that you will see for sale, are almost certainly imports. And that means that they suffer from all the normal wild-caught import problems. We've actually got a whole video on that if you want to check that out. But these are going to be things like they're going to come in with a high parasite load, they're going to come in emaciated and dehydrated and just generally stressed. And so the probability of an adult import crashing on you within the first few months is very high. The babies, when you get captive bred babies, they can actually be fairly fragile as babies. So all those care requirements that we mentioned before, make sure those are really on point and that you've got very small insect feeders available for them. Once you get them eating regularly and assuming that you provide the appropriate care required for an adult or baby alligator lizard, they really should thrive, and I would definitely recommend getting captive bred. Not only are they more likely to survive for you, but then you're not threatening wild populations of these guys, which it could be just absolutely devastating because these lizards are so cool. So everybody wants them. And I'm not sure how well they're being regulated in the wild. And so they could potentially be captured to extinction or near extinction. And that's horrible. You don't want to support that. So I definitely recommend getting captive bred babies. The only exceptions would be breeders who are trying to strengthen their bloodlines. Other than that, I would not recommend anybody get wild caught adults. When it comes to availability, we give the Arboreal Mexican Alligator Lizard, hi there open mouth, a score of 2 out of 5. As we mentioned before, most of them that you're going to find for sale are wild-caught adults, and I would not recommend buying them at all. If you do, they're going to suffer from the normal import issues, and this is a major threat to wild populations. They are available captive bred. These are a live-bearing lizard, which means that they give birth to a relatively small number of babies, and live bearers can be just a little bit challenging to breed, but there are a number of people out there who are having regular success breeding Arboreal alligator lizards, which is just fantastic news. Like I said, their breeding can be challenging. It looks like having regular and major temperature fluctuations can be key, but there's a lot that we still need to learn about the breeding of these guys. The ones that you're going to find in pet stores and at expos, generally speaking, are wild-caught adults. The best bet for getting an actual captive bred baby is to find a breeder, probably online. And that is how I would recommend getting an Arboreal alligator lizard. Honestly, if you can't find one that's captive bred, I would just say, wait, don't get one yet. You know, it's not going to be fair to you because there's a high probability it'll die. And worse than that, you'll be killing a lizard that came right from the wild and that everybody wants right from the wild. And who knows how long they will exist in the wild if we keep that up. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the Arboreal alligator lizard a score of 3 out of 5. There's a very high demand for these because they're like the coolest lizards in the world. I mean, they look like tiny, green, amazing, super beautiful dragons. Lizards don't get any cooler, period. And there's a low availability for them. So if you can do basic economics, high demand, low availability, high cost, and these are expensive lizards, even wild caught, which is ridiculous. They're expensive, but not crazy expensive. Not like thousands of dollars expensive, but hundreds of dollars expensive. The equipment that you'll need for them is not excessively expensive. Screen enclosures tend to be cheaper than glass, so the enclosure that you need, at least for a large front entry enclosure, will be fairly affordable. As I said before, I would recommend a fogger or a misting system. That'll definitely add some cost, but it'll save you a tremendous amount of manual misting. You're gonna need some sphagnum moss and a water bowl that's large enough to provide a decent amount of humidity in the enclosure. Climbing branches and cork rounds. I would recommend climbing branches that won't mold, so things like spider wood, Mopani, and also artificial vines and climbing surfaces are going to be great, as well as live plants and cork rounds. And then, of course, the UVB lighting. You're not going to need the basking lights probably, but you are going to need UVB lighting, and that's expensive and needs replaced frequently. We'll have links to all these things down in the description so you can actually get everything you would need for your own Abronia alligator lizard right here. So in conclusion, we give the Abronia Mexican Arboreal Alligator Lizard a score of 2.8 out of 5. Hopefully that makes sense by now. They're honestly similarly demanding in terms of their care to some of the easier to keep chameleon species. So that is definitely not a review that, hey, if you're a beginner, this is a great lizard for you. Chameleons are difficult, and these guys, like chameleons, are somewhat difficult captives. If you want a beautiful, interesting, somewhat challenging lizard that might bite some chunks out of your hand and is absolutely stunning and will blow your friends away with its beauty, then the Abronia alligator lizard, at least a captive bred baby, might be the perfect pet reptile for you. As always, like and subscribe. Click that little bell so you get notifications when we come out with other amazing lizards, because this is beautiful. There are other lizards that are similarly beautiful that might be even better suited to your needs. And maybe you just need both anyway. So definitely stay tuned. We want to thank those of you at Patreon for all that you're doing for us. You might have noticed how gloriously beautiful some of the B-roll especially was for this, or how the sound sounds so much better. Well, those improvements were made possible because of you guys. So thank you so much for all that you've done for us and all that you continue to do. We will try to continue to make improvements to make your investment worthwhile. And we hope to see you real soon. Apparently, if you look us up on the Google, we are a meme.
For the cave review.
That is right.
That's funny.
You've seen it?
It was on Reddit. Somebody submitted it
to us?
To PewDiePie.
Somebody submitted it to the actual PewDiePie?
Yeah, there's like a Reddit.
How did you notice this?
I searched Reddit for Clint's Reptiles because I noticed that Reddit was still sending us traffic. And so I'm like, well, what are people finding? And I noticed that.
I hope that Will and Michelle watch PewDiePie enough to know if we remember. I'm sure a million people would tell us if we showed up.
I don't think it actually showed up. But
yeah, because it's not that funny, but it kind of is. What an amazing beast.
Anything else?
Oh, I don't even know what to say. What an amazing lizard. What a privilege. How about that local sports team?
Yeah. Go my favorite sports team, go.
Okay. It's gonna be a good shot, actually.